The Senate will come to order. I ask everyone present to please rise and await the presentation of the colors. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today we are joined by Chaplain Colonel Kelly John Moore, Garrison Chaplain for Fort Drum, to give our invocation.
I invite you to pray with me. Lord God above, ruler of heaven and earth, thank you for giving us our life and breath, for the privilege and opportunity to serve a purpose higher than ourselves. Thank you for men and women of this nation who voluntarily and sacrificially serve our military, who daily strive to keep the citizens of our nation safe, that we all may enjoy the fruit of liberty. Today, as we recognize Fort Drum in the 10th Mountain Division, I pray for your hand of protection, particularly upon those currently deployed. And I give thanks that you have placed Fort Drum in this state, that we may share the beauty and benefits of this great state. But I pray not only for those who wield the sword, but for those who wield the pen. For this body gathered here today, I pray you grant wisdom in the understanding of complex issues, knowledge to act with fortitude and compassion, and most of all, moral courage to do what is right in your eyes. May God bless our nation. May God bless the state of New York. In your most holy and precious name I pray. Amen.
Reading of the Journal.
In Senate, Monday, March 17th, the Senate met pursuant to adjournment. The Journal of Sunday, March 16th was read and approved. On motion, Senate adjourned.
Without objection, the Journal stands approved as read. Presentation of petitions. Messages from the Assembly. Messages from the Governor. Reports of standing committees. Reports of select committees. Communication and reports from state officers. Motions and resolutions. Senator Libous.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to adopt the resolution calendar with the exception of Resolution 3997, 4060, and 4073.
All in favor of adopting the resolution calendar with the exception of Resolutions 3997, 4060, and 4073 signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The resolution calendar is adopted. Senator Libous.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe there's a resolution by Senator Ritchie, number 3997. It is at the desk. I ask that it be read in its entirety, and could you please call on Senator Ritchie and Senator Skelos before its adoption?
Secretary will read.
Legislative Resolution number 3997 by Senator Ritchie, memorializing Governor Andrew M. Cuomo to proclaim March 18, 2014 as Fort Drum Day in the state of New York. Whereas, it is the sense of this legislative body to support and promote the historic and significant achievements of Fort Drum and the United States Army 10th Mountain Division. And whereas Fort Drum is the largest Army post in the northeastern United States with 19,605 soldiers and 4,739 civilian workers. And whereas Fort Drum is the largest employer in northern New York with an economic impact on the North Country in the state of New York of $1.6 billion. And whereas Fort Drum traces its roots to 1907 when the post was known as Camp Hughes after the New York Governor Charles Hughes, and later as Pine Camp, and was founded in 1951 as Camp Drum in honor of Lieutenant General Hugh A. Drum, who commanded the 1st Army during World War II and eventually designated as Fort Drum in 1974. And whereas the 10th Mountain Division, which earned honor during World War II, fighting in the mountains of Italy in some of the roughest terrain in the country, and which was renowned for its expertise in mountain and winter warfare, was reactivated as Fort Drum in 1985 as a rapid deployment combat light infantry unit dispatched to trouble spots around the globe. And whereas Fort Drum continues to be home of the United States Army 10th Mountain Division Light Infantry, which includes the most deployed combat brigade in the United States Army, with deployments to Operation Desert Storm in Saudi Arabia, Operation Restore Hope and Operation Continue Hope, Somalia, Operation Uphold Democracy, Haiti, Operation Joint Forge, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Operation Joint Guardian, Kosovo, as well as hurricane relief efforts inside the United States. And whereas the 10th Mountain Division's 3 combat brigades at Fort Drum have seen numerous deployments to both Iraq and Afghanistan in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, in fighting the nation's ongoing war against terror since September 11, 2001. And whereas Fort Drum and the 10th Mountain Division are commanded by Major General Stephen J. Townsend and a dedicated cadre of officers whose commitment to our nation and our troops is exemplary. And whereas Major General Townsend and his command headquarters are currently deployed in Afghanistan, and the 10th Mountain Division is expected to be among the last military forces to leave that country in 2014. And whereas the 10th Mountain Division, throughout its operational history, has been awarded 6 campaign streamers, including 2 campaign streamers in World War II, and 4 campaign streamers in the War on Terrorism, as well as 2 unit decorations. And whereas a total of 7 soldiers posted to Fort Drum and its predecessors are recipients of the nation's highest military honor for valor, the Medal of Honor, including 2 members of the 10th Mountain Division, PFC John D. McGrath, for his actions at Casteldiano, Italy, during World War II, and Sergeant First Class Jared Monte, who received the medal posthumously in 2009 for his heroism in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, as part of Operation Enduring Freedom, and who was just one of 6 Medal of Honor recipients since 2001 in the start of the global war on terror. And whereas thousands of New York men and women have passed through Fort Drum as members of our armed forces, the Army, National Guard, and Reserves, showing service, dedication, sacrifice, and commitment in living up to the 10th Mountain Division motto, Climb to Glory. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this legislative body pauses its deliberations to memorialize Governor Andrew M. Cuomo to proclaim March 18, 2014 as Fort Drum Day in the state of New York, and be it further resolved that copies of this resolution suitably engrossed be transmitted to Major General Stephen J. Townsend, Commanding General of Fort Drum and the 10th Mountain Division.
Senator Skelos.
We're all honored today to have General Howard and soldiers from Fort Drum visiting with us today. I want to thank Senator Patty Ritchie for making this day possible, and also for her support on a daily basis of the fine men and women of Fort Drum. The 10th Mountain Division has an incredibly rich history. Since the first combat deployment in 1945, the division soldiers have defended our country, fought for freedom around the world. This division also has a strong history of humanitarian missions, not only here in the United States, but in places like Bosnia, Haiti, and Somalia. Fort Drum is an outstanding unit that has an enormous impact on the economy and also a steadfast contributor to our nation's defense. General Howard, your presence here is humbling. It reminds us how blessed we are to be Americans, to have brave soldiers who dedicate their lives to protecting our country. All of us here cannot thank you enough. To say we appreciate your service is simply an understatement. Your courage, valor, and dedication to this great nation is truly honorable, and we are so proud of everyone serving at Fort Drum. To your colleagues who are overseas and to those deploying this year, they are and always will be in our thoughts and prayers. We look forward to everyone's safe return home. I thank you all for joining us here today, And Mr. President, if you could recognize Senator Ritchie.
Thank you, Senator Skelos. Senator Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm proud to sponsor Fort Drum Day once again in the New York State Senate and want to welcome General Howard and the soldiers and officers of the 10th Mountain Division here in the Senate chamber. Your presence here reminds us of the thousands of men and women who volunteer to serve and defend our nation of members of our armed forces. Your presence also reminds us of the importance of Fort Drum, not just to our nation's defense, but also to the communities that I represent in the North Country. You remind us of the importance as New York's largest single-site employer and the billions of dollars that Fort Drum pours into our state and local communities. There is something else I want to remind everyone today, that while General Howard and these men and women are here today to share with us Fort Drum Day, their commanding general, Stephen Townsend, and the entire headquarters battalion are currently in Afghanistan, serving alongside thousands of other soldiers from Fort Drum. The 10th Mountain Division was reactivated at Fort Drum on September 11, 1984. In the days following September 11, 2001, Fort Drum soldiers and officers were the very first sent overseas in response to the World Trade Center attack. On September 11, 2014, as we remember that horrible day, 13 years ago, members of the 10th Mountain Division will be preparing to be the last troops to return home. Many, if not all, the men and women in uniform you see in this room were part of that campaign to defend America and keep us safe. Among them are many native New Yorkers. But from where I stand, I want to be clear that all the men and women of Fort Drum are New Yorkers. And the 10th Mountain Division is New York's 10th Mountain Division. And I want to thank all of you for your service. I want to thank General Howard and General Townsend for allowing us to celebrate Fort Drum Day in the 10th Mountain Division. I also want to acknowledge some guests that are here with us today who advocate on behalf of Fort Drum. And they're here to answer some of your questions. For my colleagues who haven't had the opportunity to visit some of the displays that are out between the doors, it really brings home the sacrifice of the men and women that are here today and what they have to go through when they're deployed. So Senator Skelos, I would like to thank you and thank Senator Klein for allowing us to celebrate Fort Drum Day and the 10th Mountain Division here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ritchie. Senator Sanders.
Allegedly, General Howard, that there is a rivalry between the Marine Corps and the Army. And of course, this is a mere allegation. But we in the Marine Corps recognize that the 10th Mountain Division is a hardcore group that has served outstanding in every theater that they have been sent to. And I just wanted to stand up and congratulate you guys for doing what you have done, what you are doing, and what you will do for this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. All in favor of adopting the resolution, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The resolution is adopted. Senator Libous.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I believe Senator Ritchie would like to open the resolution up for everyone to co-sponsor. And as the policy goes here, if someone, for whatever reason, wishes not to be a co-sponsor, just let the desk know, and we would proceed. Mr. President, it is an honor for me at this time to introduce to my colleagues General Michael Howard, who will go to the rostrum and address the Senate today. General Howard.
General.
I don't know of any rivalry between the Army and the Marine Corps. Senator Skelos, Senator Klein, Senator Stewart-Cousins, and Senator Ritchie, of course, thank you so much for inviting me here today. You all know that General Townsend's in Afghanistan as his deputy and as the senior commander at Fort Drum for the next year. It's a real pleasure to represent him today in front of you. So in the spirit of the name, Fort Drum Day in New York, I thought I'd take a minute to tell you a little bit about Fort Drum soldiers, what the division is doing, how it is the division and the community, the North Country community, interact, and maybe talk a word or two about the drawdown, the drawdown in resources and potential drawdown in forces. So let me start with soldiers. Last week I visited the Warrior Transition Unit at Drum. Many of you know that this is a very unique organization that takes care of those soldiers that require the most complex care as they heal and return either to their unit or back to their civilian lives. So I was walking down the hall and someone called out, "Lieutenant Colonel Howard, is that you?" Well, the rank's wrong. I'm not a lieutenant colonel, but the name was certainly right and I recognized the voice. So I turned around and I faced a man that I served with in 2004 at Fort Drum when I was a lieutenant colonel. I asked him if he was a patient at the WTU, and he told me no, he was a cadre member, that he was leading soldiers. Unique about this guy is he's an amputee. He lost his leg in a horrific mine strike in 2004. Last time I saw him was just before his 5th operation. I told him that I recall that day, and he smiled and told me he remembered it as well. He remembered it because I think we promoted him right around that time also. And he also told me that he stopped counting his operations after his 50th operation. He's an amputee with a multi-year recovery that chose to stay on active duty and continue to serve. Ladies and gentlemen, the ranks are filled with people like that, with those kind of great stories, who have given so much of themselves to the nation. And in these wars, if you give yourself to the nation, you're really giving yourself to the whole world, because these are world problems, not American problems. To me, their patriotism is overwhelming. Senior leaders in the Army say all the time that the strength of the nation is the Army, and the strength of the Army is its people. And that's certainly true at Fort Drum, where we have 18,000 soldiers, most of whom are veterans of Iraq or Afghanistan, or in a lot of cases, both. Many entered the service well after the war had begun, which means they joined the Army knowing full well that they were signing up to go to war. Last year, we lost 20 soldiers from Fort Drum in the war, and we've lost more than 300 since the war began. That's not 300 lives lost. That's 300 families devastated. Those numbers are the dead. The injured number in the thousands. And again, that's not soldiers injured. That's families injured. Some in the mainstream media talk about the war like it's over. Well, at 10th Mountain Division, it's not over. The 10th Mountain was the first division to deploy. They're there now. They'll be one of the last, if not the last division to leave Afghanistan. Since the war began, Drum has deployed brigade-sized organization, that's roughly a 3,000-man sized organization, 33 times to Afghanistan and Iraq. Last year, we averaged about 5,000 soldiers deployed at any one time, and today we have about 3,500 in Afghanistan. Despite the deployments, despite the hardships, despite the dangers, soldiers continue to join the Army in record numbers. They continue to re-enlist in record numbers. Old soldiers like me that don't re-enlist anymore return to Fort Drum voluntarily. Not because we have to, but because we want to, because we love the unit and we love the community. Of the folks that did re-enlist last year, half stayed at Fort Drum. So there's a reason why Fort Drum soldiers love the community, love the North Country. In my view, it's because they are so uniquely embedded in the North Country. In my 28 years of service, I've moved 13 times and lived on 9 Army installations. Nowhere were the installation and the community as intertwined and dependent on each other as they are at Fort Drum. So let me try to lay this out for you a little more clearly. Each year at Drum, we publish an economic impact statement. Last year, the positive economic impact on the North Country, on New York State, was $1.4 billion. Since we've been keeping these statistics since 1988, the impact has been over $19 billion. The impact is measured in a number of ways, and I won't mention every one of them because this speech would really be long if I did. But a couple really demonstrate the cooperation that I'm speaking of. First, and probably the most obvious, is the size of the workforce and the associated payroll on drum. The base employs 18,000 soldiers and about 4,000 civilians for a total payroll of $1.1 billion annually. That's $1.1 billion of groceries and gas and rent and electricity and firewood and tuition, et cetera. That's really, really helpful to the North Country. That's really, really useful to New York. And this doesn't even include the more than 18,000 family members, many of whom work in the community. Many Army installations that I've served on have a hospital. Drum does not, but we do great without one because the hospitals in the area, Samaritan, Carthage, River, care for our soldiers and family members. In fact, every Saturday I send a member of our command group to all of the local hospitals to check on our soldiers and their families. This past Saturday we had 9 new mothers and 9 new babies in one of our local hospitals. It was Samaritan. And by the way, there wasn't a uniform in sight, a military uniform. It's pretty easy to bond with a community that brings your children into the world and then cares for your new mothers. And in return, by our count, we spent $29 million last year on medical care and another $5 million on dental care. And that's really helpful in the North Country. Similarly, the other installations that I've served on have schools on base. One that I served on has 9 schools on the base. It's its own school district, and that's more the norm than not. Drum, as you know, has no schools on base, but that's okay. We do great without them because our children go to school in the community. And that's about 8,000 kids, by the way. My own children went to Carthage and Indian River, and they had hugely positive experiences. All 3 are in college now, and they all have lifelong friends from New York. Some of them are children from military bases, like Drum, as you might imagine, but many are simply New York children that have never seen a military installation. It's pretty easy to bond with an installation that helps you educate your kids and help you raise your children. In return, local school districts received $48 million last year in federal impact aid. That's just the school-age children. We also have 3,000 soldiers that go to college in New York State colleges. And these colleges benefited from $1.5 million in federal tuition assistance. So with such a strong bond, such an interwoven set of common interests, it's easy to understand why talk of reducing resources and force reductions cause anxiety. And if I could, I'll just talk to this for just a minute. You know that our Army is reducing its strength from 560,000 to 490,000 by the end of FY15. And part of that reduction is our 3rd Brigade Combat Team, which will inactivate when they come back from Afghanistan later this year. Now, the loss of the brigade will be offset in part, but not completely, by growth in other units on the fort. You probably recall that the Army leadership reached out to elected leaders at all levels before they decided exactly what to cut. Recently, our senior leadership announced that the Army would reduce again, now from 490,000 down to between 440 and 450,000. And if the budget cuts dictated by sequestration return in FY16, the force levels will drop in even more, potentially as low as 420,000. Senior leaders in the military warn that every Army installation has the potential to be impacted. As you might imagine, I get lots of queries on what this means for Fort Drum, for the North Country, and for New York. And the truth is, right now, I don't know. Nobody does. What I do know is that the military is moving towards a lighter, more agile force that deploys rapidly. Well, that's exactly what the 10th Mountain Division is right now. That's why we were built in the 1980s and what we've been called repeatedly to do in the last 12 years of this war. In that regard, I think we're in pretty good shape. I also know that our senior leadership has stated repeatedly that, as they did before the decision to cut to 490, that they want to hear from elected leaders again, so that the impact on local and state governments is fully understood and considered in the decision making. And based on the last reduction, I'm quite sure that you all fully intend to make your views known. One final note worth considering while I'm talking about reduced resources. The Army shouldered a heavy burden for well over a decade now, affecting many soldiers and many families. We must maintain our commitment to these soldiers and families, especially families of fallen and those who are caring for service members that were wounded in combat. I ask that you think about how you and your delegations can take part in ensuring we continue to provide post-conflict care and support to these folks. Like the soldier I mentioned earlier in my remarks, the man who endured more than 50 operations, many of our soldiers and their families have years to go before they're whole again. Let me close by saying that we're professionals who are afforded a world-class installation called Fort Drum in a world-class community called the North Country in the world-class state of New York. In return, we maintain our steady focus on training, on readiness, and rapid deployment to answer the nation's call whenever it comes. The mission endures, and you can be sure that we'll be ready. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm very proud to be a New York soldier, and I'm very proud that March 18th, 2014 is Fort Drum Day in New York. Climb to glory.
Senator Libous.
General Howard, on behalf of all the members of the Senate and certainly Senator Patty Ritchie, we welcome again you and the men and women of Fort Drum. And not only do we appreciate what you do for the economy of this state and for protection overall, but as Senator Skelos said in his remarks, from the bottom of our hearts, we can't thank you enough, and the men and women for the sacrifice, as you said, that protecting us worldwide, because every conflict that we seem to approach now is a worldwide conflict. And we are so lucky and so proud to have all of you on our side. Thank you.